You're listening to Kicking It with the Koves. Do you have a problem with it?
No, Sensei.
I mean, no, Dad.
No, Dad.
Hey guys, it's Jesse Cove. Welcome back to Kicking It with the Koves. I'm here with my sister Rachel. My dad, unfortunately, could not be here today. He's actually in St. Louis right now watching the Karate Kid, the musical, which is a pretty good excuse why he couldn't be on the episode. And I know that show is actually going to be going to Broadway, so I will definitely be there watching it with the rest of the family when it does, I think in the spring. But he will be back next week. Before we welcome our guest and get into it, I want to say thanks to everyone who's been leaving us 5-star ratings and reviews. It really, really helps us so much. I know like everybody says this, click, subscribe, write a review, but like it actually really does help us. So we really, really appreciate it. So please keep them coming. And we actually do read your comments. So please keep doing it. And we so appreciate it.
Okay, so hi everyone, Rachel Cove here. I'm so excited to welcome back my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Judy Ho. She is returning to Kicking It with the Koves. Judy is a licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. She's a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University, a published author, and she's an incredible author, I will say that, of Stop Self-Sabotage. She's the host of her own podcast, Supercharged Life, and she's a huge Cobra Kai fan. Are you not, Judy?
100%. I'm so excited to talk about Cobra Kai again.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you back because you have almost more passion for Cobra Kai than I feel like my family does. And it's just so nice to hear and see because you're someone I respect and admire so much. And today I wanted to talk about and break down the psychology of Johnny Lawrence. Because when you were on last time, we were talking a lot about bullying, but we were also talking a lot about John Kreese and how John Kreese developed into a bully. So that is what I wanted to break down with you today.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this. And one of the reasons why I love Cobra Kai so much, not only because all of the actors are just so amazing and I think portray these characters in such a enlightening and insightful way, but it's just, all of these types of conflicts that they have, I think it's relatable at any age. I feel like if you're a child, you can relate. If you're an adult, you can relate. And then as a psychologist, I see the deeper side of that character portrayal too, which means there's pain that each of these people have dealt with. There's issues that they've contended with in the past. And even as adults, you want to believe that you're over it, but sometimes you're not, and you can be easily triggered into the things that have upset you in the past.
Yeah, and I definitely like using this platform to also talk about bullying. And I think Cobra Kai is a great way to focus on bullying and the impacts of bullying. And I know that in the world that we live in right now, it's really scary because of what's happening. And I think that if people are listening to this, I hope that they can get some tips and tools on the psychology of someone like Johnny Lawrence, who has kind of done a 360, right? Or like a 180, because in high school, he was the one that the audience said was bullying Daniel. I want to know your point of view on that. Do you feel like he was the bully? Because I know I think it was season 1, he was explaining to, was it Miguel, that his perspective of what happened with him and Daniel. What do you think about that?
But before she gets into it, hold on. I want to say 2 things. One, Rachel, I think your AirPods are screwing up the audio. So take them off.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah, I
hold
think
on.
it's better when you don't have them in there. Go ahead and talk for a second.
Hello?
Oh my God, another world.
That's so weird. Okay.
Oh, great. Okay, then I'll back it up for a second. Before Judy gets into that, I actually wanted to piggyback off what Rachel said, because I was recently in England with my dad and a couple of cast members, and we were doing a Comic-Con convention there. And it really is so true how some of the fans, even little kids across the pond on the other side of the world, are also affected in the same way with what you're saying, like how much the characters mean to them, the bullying stuff, the anti-bullying, the strength it gives people, the journeys that they're following with the show. And so it was really amazing. We talked about that in depth. It was really amazing to just be in a whole nother country and just seeing how, these different people are affected in the same way that we are here, where Karate Kid Cobra Kai takes place. And I just think that was a beautiful thing to experience. And I was, obviously very lucky to be able to be a part of that. And so anyway, I just thought it was it was just amazing. So whoever's listening, and by the way, a lot of fans in England. I had so many people that came up to us that told us how much they love the podcast. So for those of you who are listening over there, I remember you, I appreciate you, and we're going to jump back into Judy right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing that experience, Jesse. That sounds like so much fun that you guys had in England, and how validating it is to meet fans all over the world and know the impact that your work is making on people all around the globe. But yeah, you know, I feel like this is what's really interesting. The Karate Kid series really highlighted Daniel as the protagonist, right? And I feel like the story was much more pure in the way that the protagonist was just a protagonist. The antagonist is just the antagonist. You're just supposed to hate Johnny. You're supposed to hate Kreese, right? And you're supposed to love Daniel. And I think the genius of Cobra Kai is that sometimes you find yourself rooting for different people at different times because they're all so complex. And I alluded to this the first time I was on the show, that Daniel has some unsavory qualities. Like, there's parts of his personality that I think are, you know, extremely, this is not a real word, but it's like the first word that came to mind when I was thinking about Daniel in some of the early scenes of Cobra Kai in season 1. Like, he's a braggadocious dude. Like, he loves the fact that he has all this money. He has his own like pizza oven. Like, I don't know. It was a lot, you know, the guy is a little cheese. You know what I mean?
But it's like they got to have the journey, right? They got to have them start somewhere. Things change. Like, and so, but I agree with you. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that was something that really struck me. And then, you know, with Cobra Kai, you kind of see this redemption arc of Johnny and Kreese. Actually, you see their backstory and you feel sympathetic to what they're going through. You see that they're actually not all bad. And I would say that between Johnny and Kreese still seems like, oh man, like he's kind of too far to maybe save him. Like, that's how you sometimes feel about Kreese. You know, it's like, man, like you give him a chance and then he ends up doing this other thing again and you're really upset. Johnny, I feel like, has been this person who you're supposed to root for. Like, you feel bad for him. You know, he had his high school heyday. He was like, you know, the jock, the popular guy. And then the first scene you see him in Cobra Kai is he's in this like dump of an apartment and he's just got alcohol all over his house and junk food, right?
And on his body.
Right. And this is a man who's in his 50s. So you're like, okay, maybe that's okay if you're in college. Not so much when you're 50 something, right? And so I think you're supposed to feel for them actually at this point. You're supposed to know that these characters are not perfect. They're all multi-layers. They all have redeeming qualities and some qualities that you wish they didn't have, right? But I think that every character in the show reminds you of somebody that you know. And I think that's why it's so interesting. And even with your character, Jesse, you know, it's like your character bullied Kreese's character. Kreese's
Right.
character bullies Johnny's character. Johnny's character bullies Daniel. Like, it's like, sadly, the intergenerational trauma of it all is, I think, just such a big theme. And then people just don't know how to get themselves out of it because that was their only defense mechanism, is when they're hurting, when they're not feeling good, they project it outwards, they inflict that pain onto someone else. And the idea is, I hope nobody discovers how vulnerable I am. I think that that's really what's behind a lot of the bullying in the show.
Yep.
I could sit in that for like an hour, just the avoidance of vulnerability, which is why it was really nice, I think, to see Kreese's vulnerability with Johnny when Johnny found out that Kreese was living in like a homeless shelter type situation. And it was really beautiful to watch. Why do you feel like Kreese is so important to Johnny?
Kreese is Johnny's only father figure.
Mm.
You know, truly and really, because Johnny's biological father exited his life for unknown reasons when Johnny was about 5. And so unknown reasons, when you're a child that age, you blame it on yourself, right? Why did daddy leave? Oh, maybe it's because he hated me. He doesn't love me. I'm a bad child. And that's just what all children do. They tend to put the center on themselves when they're that young because they really, truly don't understand that, hey, sometimes it's other people's problem and it's not yours, right? So he really didn't have a father figure. Then his mother marries Sid, who I guess he was around, but all he did was belittle Johnny, make him feel bad about himself. Johnny, you're basically a loser. I mean, this is the way that Sid made Johnny feel throughout his life. So he wasn't really a father figure. It was more like, you know, he was a bank. It was like, if I want to do something, I have to ask Sid's permission because Sid's the one who has the money. And Sid's going to be the one who pays for my drum lessons or whatever else that Johnny had been interested in when he was a child. So when he finally meets Kreese, that was his first true exposure at a father figure. And this all goes back to attachment, right? Johnny didn't really have an attachment figure that he could really trust, not even his mom, sadly. Like his mom is obviously the biggest attachment figure in his life, but she also made some errors, according to Johnny. She married Sid, right? Mom made Johnny feel unimportant. So mom is busy with Sid, trying to make Sid happy. You know, some of it was out of necessity because if Sid divorced mom, they would literally have no way to deal with their finances and getting themselves back on their feet. So I think mom was very, very nice to Sid. You see in those scenes where she's like tiptoeing around Sid almost. But I think that takes attention away from parenting Johnny. So finally, Johnny discovers this relationship with Kreese, and there's that mentor relationship there. And I think it's his dad. Essentially, Kreese is Johnny's dad, and they have that dynamic throughout Cobra Kai, you know, that love-hate relationship, but he can never shake himself of Kreese. And when he sees Kreese suffering, he has to step in. It's like his conscience is just flooding with, I have to do something for this man, because despite all of the things that he did that weren't so great, like he is essentially like family to me.
It's so interesting you bringing up attachment. And what I'm thinking about is there must be some people in the audience, because I even felt this way. How is this guy holding on to the loss of a karate match for 30 years? And I'm curious if you feel that the loss of the karate match plus John Kreese abandoning him in that moment when he was like about to punch him in the face, and the other students were trying to defend Johnny in Karate Kid 2, I think. Do you feel like it triggered Johnny's abandonment from his own biological father, and that's why he could not progress his life for 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I think when I look at Johnny in that moment, I think Johnny really was appreciative of Kreese in his life. Again, the father figure he never had. However, I think he always felt that Kreese's love was not unconditional. Essentially, it was because Johnny was great at karate and he was his star student. So it's like, I have to keep achieving to keep this dad around, to keep this father figure around. And when he got second place, it wasn't just losing the trophy, it was the loss of the relationship with his father figure. And of course, his worst dreams come true, right? Like maybe there was a small part of him that thinks, well, maybe Kreese will still stick with me, even though I didn't get first place. So second place isn't so bad. And of course, Kreese says, you're a loser. And that abandonment happens right there. Like, it's not good enough unless you're first place. And so Johnny's worst fear is that this is not a man who truly loves me. He only loves me because of the things that I do and achieve. And then unfortunately, it kind of was realized, you know, his worst fear came true.
I think a lot of people feel that. So go ahead, Jess.
I was just gonna say, it was interesting before we were talking about like the father figures, because I feel like even in today, like so many kids, you know, equate that parental figure in school, like a coach, or, you know, maybe some of the teachers, because at home they don't have maybe that kind of dynamic or that learning dynamic. And I feel like that does happen so much. Like, and I also feel like coaches try to instill, not they're trying to replace their parents, but they are trying to like be this kind of learning figure that they can learn from and look up to and be a role models, really, right? Like the best thing, I guess, a lot of like, you know, I guess even like Kreese's character as a role model, his version of what a role model should be is very skewed, you know, because of who his role models were. And so it's a really complicated thing. And I just love that we're able, I think this is also why everybody's so obsessed with the show, is because we're like literally breaking this thing down. Like, you know, it goes back to like 30 years ago and then today. And it's like, we're still figuring out what did this, what was the moment that happened here that made him do this? And, you know, we're still like discovering these things all this time later. I just think it's amazing. And I think it's actually teaching us about ourselves, which I think is so beautiful.
I agree with you completely, Jesse. I think it does teach us about ourselves. And I think that sometimes when we're watching the show, you know, it's kind of fun and you can kind of get caught up in analyzing these guys and almost judging them, right? Like, I can't believe you're holding on to this 30 years after the fact. Like, what's wrong with you? But I would just dare everybody who's listening to the show right now to ask themselves, like, isn't there a pivotal moment or memory or 2 or 3 or 10 from your own childhood that even as an adult today, it does still affect you? Like, you still think about it. And when something happens, it might trigger that specific memory. We all have that, right? But it's funny that when we're watching it as a spectator, we're thinking, gosh, Johnny, get a life. Like, why do you, like, this group of people are nuts. Like, why are you guys still talking about the glory days when you're 16? But it's not so much about the glory days, but about what those moments represented, right? It's the first moment where Johnny thought, man, I guess I am a loser. And then there's that self-sabotaging quality to Johnny. Like, he makes headway and then he just sabotages himself, right? Like, he's about to become a dad, and this is his chance to remake that whole experience, right? Be an awesome parent. And then instead he ends up drinking himself into a stupor and missing his son's birth. Right? Like, there's all these things that happen throughout time where it looks like he's making headway. And then that part of himself that maybe doesn't believe he deserves better will just end up doing something to mess it all up. And then his internal dialogue is, I guess I am a loser. Well, what moment does that take you back to? That moment when he lost that trophy, you know? So I think that a lot of that is really encapsulated in Johnny's character, and why you're also rooting for him, because you can see that he has a good heart. He keeps trying to make things better. He tries to have a better relationship with Robbie and be a better dad, but it doesn't work out. Then he turns his attention onto Miguel, because it's like, okay, Miguel's my proxy child now. Like, now I get to redo it with him because Robbie hates me, but maybe Miguel will love me. But then, you know, he messes up along the way, and then Miguel and him have their conflicts too. And so I feel for Johnny, because I think that he's kind of stuck in that cycle of, you know, self-critique that he can't get himself out of. And then what we talk to ourselves and how we talk to ourselves is really important, because it really does affect how you go about trying to reach goals in life. If you really don't think that you deserve good things, when you're about to get something really good, you're going to mess it up. You're just going to mess it up. And then that's consistent with your worldview that maybe I'm not good enough to deserve any of these things anyway.
And does that have a lot to do with people's core beliefs? Because rationally, you could say I'm good enough, but if you have this subconscious core belief, people innately self-sabotage, right?
Yeah, I think that that's what's happening with Johnny. And I think that unfortunately right now, in his life, there's a lot of reminders of the things that triggered those negative core beliefs in the first place. So he's got to deal with Kreese, and that obviously is triggering some of those negative beliefs in himself. He has to deal with Daniel, and there's always going to be that inherent competition, because Daniel was the first person who made him feel as bad as he did that day when he lost the trophy. And it's not so much about Daniel's personality now, but it's just about what Daniel symbolizes. It's like, this is the guy that made me a loser. This is the guy that made me lose my father figure. So you can see that there's probably all of this weird underlying resentment and also jealousy, right? Because you look at Daniel's life and it kind of looks like he has it all. He's got the home pizza oven. He's got the hot wife, you know, he's got the 2 kids, like, you know, he's got all these things that Johnny doesn't have. You know, he has stable relationships with his children, it seems. Obviously, it's not totally true.
They're all good things to have. I actually don't have a pizza oven yet, and you know, a hot wife to be at some point, for sure.
See? I don't know why I keep going back to the pizza oven. I guess maybe I'm jealous of his pizza oven, but that's like something that really stuck with me. Like, who has a pizza oven in their kitchen? What? Like, I don't know. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Well, I think it speaks to a lot of the times when we lacked certain things in childhood, we overdo it in our adult life. And I don't think Daniel had a lot of money growing up. So I think that's probably why he brags a lot and kind of overcompensates because of his own childhood. And you're totally right. Like, I actually never thought about it until you brought it up in the last time we interviewed you, just how Daniel's character can be a little snobby sometimes. And then there's times where he's so wonderful and he's such a good father. And again, I think it speaks to how we're all complex. And I also like how we're able to see we have these unorthodox senseis, and then we have a sensei like Daniel. I'm curious, which one do you think works better for people? The Cobra Kai way or Miyagi-Do? And now we've got Eagle Fang.
Rachel, the chicken or the egg? Okay.
Right.
That is the true question.
I can't believe that I didn't wear my Eagle Fang shirt. I have one.
Do you really?
Oh, you are, aren't you? That's who you are.
Yeah, I think I'm Eagle Fang. I think so.
I love
I'm
that.
like, I can't choose, so I'm just gonna be the Eagle
It's the
Fang,
new
like the
progressive
third.
way.
Yeah,
It's so funny.
but it's crazy. I actually bought the shirt, I think, an episode or two after Eagle Fang was introduced. I'm like, I need a shirt like that.
That's so funny.
So, but you know what's interesting is I think which dojo is going to work best for you is going to be dependent on your personality too, right? Your own experiences. You can kind of see that certain of the students take to one philosophy a little bit better than the other. I think that this idea of, okay, now we're going to be this like combination dojo where we're going to take lessons from both sides in season 4. I think that that's obviously the idea. Like maybe there's balance in life, right? There's some way to say these bad things happen to me, but that doesn't mean that I'm bad and I deserve good things too, right? And
Yeah.
I think every character truly in the show, including your father's character, Kreese, is redeemable. Like I look at Kreese and I think he just needs like some really good trauma therapy. Like I think,
Right?
you know, because I think he's a good person inside, and you see the love inside. You see that the way that he treated Johnny, even though it seemed really rough around the edges, it was actually to try to toughen Johnny up so that he doesn't get bullied anymore. Like there's love behind that, you know?
It
I
probably
know.
reminds him of himself, right? I feel like that's a
Yes.
huge part of it. Like he was that
Yes.
at some point,
Yes.
which he was. I mean, I know. Yeah, I just literally said that, forgetting about that I was in that scene. But yes, that was the moment. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
think about it like if you were to step outside of this in your own personal life and you had a coach that went out of his way, or a mentor that would go out of his way to make sure you won at something, or how John Kreese went to Tori's house to make sure that she comes back to the dojo to check in on her. I think people forget that John Kreese has those qualities because they're so focused on him being this asshole and this bully and this really intense, mean guy. And then you look at, well, how many times does someone drive to your house to make sure you show up to something that a team needs you for, to make sure that you show up to something that's important for you? I mean, that would feel so good to me.
Right. And I think that sometimes, you know, if you're cynical, you might look at that scene where he went to go visit Tori as, oh, but he wanted something from Tori. I actually see it a different way. I think Kreese went to go visit her because he sees a little bit of himself in Tori, right? She's that like scrappy person who there's nobody to help her. Her parents are kind of MIA, right? It was like how Kreese grew up himself. And so I think that there's that relationship too, and why he gravitates towards mentoring children and teens that remind him of himself, which is why he was attracted to Johnny also in the first place, right? And so I think that everybody is redeemable. I honestly think that both dojos, if we're talking about Miyagi-Do or not Eagle Fang, but actually Cobra Kai, like which one would be best for a person? It really does depend on their personality. I don't know what you guys think in terms of which one you would be like feeling most at home, but I actually, me personally, I think I would do better at Cobra Kai.
That's really interesting. I've thought about it a lot because I train with Simon Rhee. I train with him as my sensei once every month or once every 2 months. And then I recently started jujitsu. And I was thinking about it because jujitsu is really difficult and it challenges me psychologically more than physically. And if there was a move, which is every class, there's a move I don't know how to do. And if I had a John Kreese character in that moment scaring me, or a Johnny Lawrence character scaring me in that moment because I didn't know how to do something, I would leave the school. I would leave the class. And then there's times where I need someone to be really, really, really hard on me. So it is, I think I would do better at Cobra Kai too, because I want to win. That's my personality.
Jesse?
I'm the same. I love winning. I'll do whatever it takes to win, not hurt people, but within reason. Winning's winning.
Yeah.
And I just think that it is a very important element, and it's also funny because I think Cobra Kai touches upon how life's really hard, and you do have to win and go through struggles and figure out what to do. And I think it's so relatable to everybody because we got there's Johnny, who's kind of your common man kind of guy, and then you've got Daniel, who's maybe a little bit upper middle class or whatever, and then it fluctuates between everybody. And I feel like there's just a place for everybody to kind of jump in and out of and see where they fit in. And even when I was like, again, when I was in at the autograph show, like it was so fun to see different people wearing the different, coat of arms or whatever you want to say, and seeing where they lie and what personalities or what, like, I mean, there was a guy, and honestly, it's so touching. Like it almost makes you emotional. Like there were so many people that were like, disabled and in wheelchairs and that were wearing, all the different clothing and material, and how inspiring it is for them as well. And, it was just really, again, touching. And it's fun to talk to everybody about where their allegiance is. And, you've got these, I remember I was talking to some guy, like, he couldn't use his legs or something. And he was just talking about how, how badass, being a Cobra Kai is. And like, it was like, I didn't expect that to hear from him, and it was like, this guy didn't want any sympathy or anything. He was just a badass. And that was where his personality lied. I think it was amazing.
So cool. I mean, again, I think this is really just a motivational piece of art that people can really see their own selves and their lives in, and also something to shoot for, no matter what kind of adversity you've been through, like there's always a second chance, maybe there's always a third or a fourth chance. And I think that really comes back to Johnny's character. I think he's been given many chances. And I think he's the kind of character that like you want to see him continue to work hard and to get to that next level, whatever that means. So it's like you conquer your karate world and it's like conquering the romance and love world. Like I want Johnny to end up in a good place with his girlfriend, I want him to have like a second son in Miguel. Like I want all these things for Johnny.
God, yes.
I just want it to work out for this guy. And you see just how much he cares and how much he loves. And like, I think that also explains a little bit of why alcoholism has been such a big part of his life. Sometimes people who are really emotionally vulnerable in different ways, they try to use alcohol and substances to essentially dull their pain, right? They might feel more than the average person. And sometimes alcohol and substances give them that like very quick and temporary respite from all of that. And I think that's how Johnny uses alcohol. And even if it causes him difficulty, it's like he doesn't have any other coping strategies. But I think he uses it because he's actually really, really sensitive inside. And he's really easily hurt, but he doesn't always let on that that's what's happening.
I think so too. And I'm curious, and I love that you were talking about alcoholism because it gives people an idea of why people drink. They're drinking to dull or to escape from the pain. They're not a bad person. They're using it as a strategy to resolve the pain that they feel inside. And it kind of leads me into a question I have around Johnny as a father figure to I was about to say to Tanner, who plays Robbie, but to Robbie. Why it's very obvious in the show that Johnny is spending all of this time with Miguel. Why would he not be consciously trying to devote that time to Robbie?
I think Johnny feels like he's already failed Robbie so many times that it's almost like starting over with Miguel. It's like a blank slate. It's so refreshing because Miguel doesn't have all the hangups that Robbie does, right? I mean, all those early scenes that you saw him with Robbie has a lot of resentment towards his dad and he doesn't trust his dad. And essentially Johnny has to keep proving over and over again that, okay, I'm a changed person, I'm doing my best, but Robbie's always going to be there poking him and saying, no, because for every one good thing you do, I have 10 bad things that you did. And I can remember them all to you right now. And I think Johnny, honestly, it's not that he was taking the easy way out. It's more like, how refreshing would it be to start with a brand new person who only sees the good side of you and who only looks up to you and doesn't think about all the bad things that you've done in the past, whether or not it was on purpose. Like there's none of that record, right? And you see that like in the very, very first scene where Miguel meets Johnny, like Johnny saves Miguel. He's Miguel's hero. And I think that's that blank slate that you want. It's like, that's the kind of father figure you want to be, where you look at your kid's eyes and your kid just looks at you like, worships you, thinks that you're the best person in the universe. He wants that feeling and he's never had it. And I don't think he thinks he's going to ever get there with Robbie. I mean, it's like this very self-defeating moment, but I think given what we know about Johnny and how he probably thinks, I think he probably thinks that he can't save that relationship the same way that he can just start a new one and have a great relationship with Miguel. Obviously, that's not how it worked out, but I think that was the allure, especially in the beginning.
Go
I was
ahead,
gonna
Jeff.
say, I just was thinking about like the father figure stuff, like having like how, Daniel has, Mr. Miyagi, and then look at how he kind of his path where he went, right? Kind of like you said, a more stable and the environment, and then where Johnny ended up, and it makes me think like if he had stayed with Kreese over those years, like what would have happened then? Even if he did stay with him and he lost that, what would have happened? Would he still have the aggression? Would he still be, tenacious and striking first at life? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because otherwise he'd always be under Kreese's shadow in a way,
Right.
instead of becoming his own man, whatever that means.
Right.
And I think that it was a really big moment for Johnny when he first reinstated Cobra Kai, like, oh, this is me. Like, I did this, right? But then of course, like Kreese comes and he's like, oh, I'm gonna take my old dojo back, right? And then now he's under Kreese's shadow again. But I think in the
And he
moment,
never got the chance to, because even when they after Karate Kid 3, the dojos got wiped out. So like Kreese didn't get a chance to continue to be that figure for him. So it's actually not
Yes.
his fault either.
Exactly. No, you're so right about that. And I think that that's why this is so complicated. On the one hand, I think it was so great for him to be like, yes, this is me. I'm my own man. I'm starting my own dojo. But remember, in the beginning, it was pathetic. There was like one student, and it was Miguel for the longest time. And in some ways, even when Kreese came back into his life, I know that those first few scenes, he was very angry with him. He's like, there's no way I'm letting you back in. But I bet there was a small part of Johnny that felt weirdly safe that Kreese was there. Like, oh, good, this is the man that had all the answers when I did it. And right now, this dojo is kind of suffering, and like, maybe I could use his help. I think he had that battle inside himself that we probably didn't get to see on screen, but I would imagine that was his inner dialogue.
And then comes in Terry Silver, just really put
I
the wrench
know.
and everything. Another terrible father figure.
Yeah, what's it with this show and like bad father figures? I guess that's what it's all about. It's like all your issues can be traced back to horrible father figures. Like Tori doesn't have a father figure either. You know what I mean? Like it just keeps going.
You think if kids when kids watch it, they identify with it that way at all? You know?
I do wonder. I feel like some of the more insightful teens, they probably do. I bet they do. I think some of them probably really over-identify with some of these characters, and they're thinking, well, I'm going to be tough just like them. But then maybe they're not seeing the other side of it. It's like, well, the reason why you feel like you have to be tough all the time is because you feel vulnerable. Like there's something beneath that. Like, why can't you sometimes just like take it easy? Why are you so intense all the time? Right?
Take it easy.
Yeah. Well, even with the Hawk's character, right? Again, same thing. The guy who was bullied, laughed at, and then he becomes Hawk. And then like he goes through this whole progression where he becomes like the most insane, horrible, terrible bully ever. And he then has like a redemption arc. But for a while there, I was very afraid that this guy was going to turn into the next psychopath. It's like this guy is on his way to, being the next serial killer or something. Like he was so intense. But people forget like how much bullying has an effect on people, and how much it just takes away your sense of identity and who you are in this world. And you just do anything never to feel that again. Like you'll do anything never to feel that again.
It's so true. I mean, it's again, yeah, it is such a very complicated subject, and I just do appreciate how, like we were talking about, how it does show the ebb and flow of the different bullying, where they come out on top and they change, and they, they're able to just morph into something better, right? I mean, even like Kreese's character. I mean, I don't know. I never really feel like he's going to really do anything like horrible to someone. He's going to like give him a slap on the back or like push him on the ground, but he's never going to do like what Terry did, or you know what I mean? He's never going to really do something. He still lives by like a code of honor,
Yeah, I think so too.
Like there was one guy, I remember there was one guy at the show, he came over, he literally had his entire forearm was an image of Kreese on his arm. And I thought to myself, like, dude, that's like your cape, man. You get to like walk around. If you're having a bad day, you can just like look down at your forearm and you see this whole thing and like just, boost you back up again. And he like said how important it was to him to have all that. And again, he had like Johnny on him too, and a snake and all this. And I was like, dude, that's just such commitment, man. Like, that's just amazing.
That is commitment, but that is so cool too, in terms of what Johnny and Kreese, like those characters represent for people.
Yeah. Right.
It's like an armor, like you said, it's like protection,
Yeah. And if you got beat up by that guy who had those things, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You'd be like, if the person he beat up was doing something wrong and injustice. But it would just make it even worse for the opponent.
Totally. I mean, you can certainly think about if you were sparring with this person, like in a professional, like karate dojo format, and you like got an uppercut and it was with that arm where the guy has, Kreese and Johnny, you're like, that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can KO me that way. That's all right. Yeah.
I love it.
I was thinking about, you were bringing up vulnerability, and if you really look at it, all Johnny and Kreese had to do after Johnny lost that tournament was, after Kreese called him a loser, Johnny just had, maybe like a week later, could call Kreese and be like, hey, Kreese, that sucked when you called me a loser. I want to tell Johnny, and like, as in my career, I would advise Johnny to go, hey, express how that made you feel, right? But no one's going to ever think of Johnny calling Kreese and be like, hey, when you said I was a loser, it made me feel sad. But all it really required was a conversation. And he avoided that conversation because he wanted to avoid what? Being vulnerable and just saying, ouch, that hurt my feelings. Like, why is that so hard for people to say?
Well, I think for them, it's complicated because Kreese actually belittled Johnny for expressing his emotions in the past. So I don't think that in that particular pairing, Johnny probably thought that was even like an open invitation. And I think that that's the kind of message that sometimes we give younger people without realizing, like we're trying to toughen them up, or we're trying to be like, think positive. But actually what you ended up accidentally doing a lot of times is making them feel like expressing emotions is not okay. And I think that that's kind of what Johnny took away from it. And that's why he was the way he was with Miguel. Even when he was training, Miguel was like, basically just like, I don't want to hear from you. Like, it's absolute obedience, But I think in general, yes, people are afraid of that conversation because they're afraid of what's on the other side. What if you let your vulnerability through and that person says, well, I don't feel the same way, or like, who cares, F you, I mean, it's something that you might think your ego will never recover from. And so I think that that's why people don't have those conversations, because they're afraid of what's going to happen on the other side and whether or not they're going to be able to walk away from it unscathed. And I think sometimes people have done that. They've done the vulnerable thing with one person and then it didn't end up well. And then they generalize it to the rest of their life. Like, okay, well, it didn't work with that one person. It's never going to work. Right. And you kind of see Johnny doing that. Like Johnny took that lesson that he learned from Kreese, well, talking about your emotions, that's a sissy thing to do. That's not a good thing to do. And then, you can see that he's really bottled up emotionally. And that's also part of why he drinks, because there's no other outlet for how to express his feelings.
Yeah, it's like the same thing. Essentially, it's like the same thing with Robbie. It's like Robbie needs to say to Johnny, Dad, I felt neglected my entire life. I didn't feel like I had a father, and this is how it affected me. And then Johnny needs to go and take responsibility. I was not there as a father. Let me hear how that affected you. It could be maybe many therapy sessions, but essentially they just need to have a conversation and they avoid it. And then it comes out as anger towards each other. It's like anger feels safer for them both.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And anger is one of those emotions that's usually a mask for other emotions. So when people say that they're angry, it's like, okay, but what else are you feeling? What else is underneath that? Is it sadness? What is it? Because I don't think that anger is actually the first layer. It's always something that covers over something else that you don't want people to see.
That is
Why is anger always so easy to go to so quickly?
Yeah. Well, anger makes you feel powerful in the moment. Like it feels action oriented somehow, but not always, because when you think about chronic anger, who's the person that is hurting because of chronic anger? It's you, if you're the one holding the chronic anger, because the other person who you're angry at isn't living your life every day and feeling the chronic anger's toll on your physical and mental well-being, right? But you're the one who's holding that resentment. And so I think in the moment, it can feel very powerful, like a temporary discharge of all of these negative emotions. But then over time, it actually ends up wearing down the person who's holding on to it the most.
Yeah. It is interesting because you do see Johnny's character, you see growth in Johnny's character. Like Eagle Fang's philosophy is like mercy is acceptable. Mm-hmm. So I do think he's changing. I do think he's seeing the need for I'll kick your ass if I need to. And also mercy is acceptable, and not everything is always about winning. Sometimes it's about the value of learning, and the value of learning to lose, and what do you gain in the struggle.
Right. And I think that that's absolutely right. It's like, what about the process and not just the outcome? And I don't want to, we can talk about season 4, right? I don't want to like spoil things for anyone, but like I've been out long enough. If you haven't watched it, cover your ears, but you should watch it because it's amazing. But you know, when he was having his conversation with Robbie, his son, and Robbie basically admits, yes, we won All Valley. That was amazing. But you know, I lost a lot for that win. You know, it wasn't really all about the outcome. Like, so I was on the winning side. So what? Like, I lost a lot of other things in my life, including a better relationship with you, because I stuck with Cobra Kai, right? And I think that we don't pay attention oftentimes to the process. You know, we pay attention to the outcome. That's what Johnny was taught when he was young by Kreese. It's all about the outcome. It's only about who wins. It's not about the character building that happens when you lose. I find that I've grown the most as a person when I've had a loss, when I've made a mistake. I don't always learn the most when I win something. So
it's just the truth. I'm the same way. It took a while to understand that, but like pain, pain, suffering, vulnerability, all that stuff, like you learn the most going through that for sure. And you know, like one of my favorite slogans is failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. That was Henry Ford who said that. And I feel like that's a great way to, button up this episode, is that walking into fear is okay, and being hurt is okay. You can recover from that.
I think so too. And I think that a lot of people listening to this, it's like, well, nobody wants to be a loser, but we have to like completely reframe what it means to lose and what it means to make a mistake, and how it's actually the time that you grow the most, become smarter, become stronger. That comes from experiencing loss in different ways. And then because of that, motivating yourself to take a deeper look and to make yourself better. And to bring a full circle, I think that that's what Johnny's doing right now. Like, we've seen him stumble so much through the 4 seasons of Cobra Kai, and clearly also in Karate Kid films. But I feel like he came the farthest in some ways in terms of his character development so far. It's like he's had a lot of ebbs and flows, and I think he's grown the most. In comparison, Daniel's character hasn't grown as much. He's had more wins in general. And I think he was already, basically in a better place when we first meet them in Cobra Kai. And so I think Johnny's character was the one that grew the most. And I'm hoping Kreese is next. I'm hoping Kreese's redemption arc is going to have a big,
She's so excited.
We're going to see him be that next person to really develop in that way.
I love it. I love your excitement for it. I just love it. Oh, it's just wonderful. I just love it. Well, Judy, thank you so much. Dr. Judy, you've just been so wonderful. And I actually love having you on here. It's so much fun to talk to you about these different things and different characters. We definitely want to have you back to talk about other characters that we can break down and just dive into. It's so much fun. I think we're talking about things that other people may have not ever spoken about before, bringing in the psychological aspect to it, and with, your understanding of that. And I think that's just amazing. And, obviously we want to thank you for being here. If you guys want to check out Dr. Judy Ho's website, that's drjudyho.com. You can follow her on Instagram, on Twitter at Dr. Judy Ho. That's JUDYHO. And be sure to check out her podcast, Supercharged Life with Dr. Judy Ho. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Same places where you can listen to Kicking with the Koves. Also, check her out and give it a like and a follow, as well as ours. We really appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews, and we will see you next week.